we're going to bring in our first guest in a split second. And I hate to say the phrase that this person needs no introduction. They technically don't, but I'm going to let this clip right here introduce this person for us.
But the people who are doing the most in this country to get at the root problems are behind bars. And that those of us who are not doing important enough work to put us behind bars must do everything we can to get the people that are there out. But I'm not here to talk about who I am and where I'm coming from. I'm here to talk about people whose lives are at stake. I am white, and I am a movie actress. I risk much less. The jails of this country are overflowing with people whose only crime is to be black and free and spreading the word around to free other people. And this is something that everyone has to become very aware of.
Ladies and gentlemen, as the meme says, in a world full of Karens, become a Jane. Please welcome to Call and Response, Jane Fonda. How you doing, Jane?
Doing okay, Baron. Interested in listening to you, both of you talking.
You're doing okay listening to both of us talking?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad that's the least I can ask for, at least. I didn't want you to be like, I'm leaving. I'm out of here. Well, we just showed this clip of you from...
What was it saying? I couldn't hear.
Yes. Well, you were basically talking about the struggle. You're talking about the struggle, and you're talking about that, you were proclaiming yourself a white movie star who is using your platform to shine a light, on people who are actually going through something, as opposed to what you're going through something, which is something that you have been doing for a really long time, putting your money where your mouth is, putting your body where the trouble is, not only from your activism in terms of civil rights, but also your environmental activism, which both are about human rights, ultimately. So that's what, we want to talk to you about today, is just your lifelong work as an activist, and kind of what you think about that. So in terms of like racial politics, what sort of turned the light on for you about those things, and what does that mean to you to if you will, be an ally to Black people?
Whoa, what turned the light on? I grew up out here in California, and I didn't have a lot of contact with Black people. But then when I was 10, we moved to a corporate community called Greenwich, Connecticut.
Oh, yes.
First time I heard the word kike, and the first time I heard the N-word. And one day I said the N-word in front of my father, and he slapped me in the face. It's the only time he ever hit me. And he said to me, "Don't you ever, ever use that word again." Well, I adored my dad, and I knew he had a lot of integrity. So the fact that that was the time that he hit me made me really start thinking about why does, it's when I became aware of what racism was about. And then I got to know quite a few Black people, and they became my friends. In fact, speaking about, when you're a celebrity and have a platform, I remember 1970 when I was just beginning to become an activist, and I hated the fact that my celebrity separated me from the people that I was organizing, basically, in Detroit. And I was friends with Kenny Cockrell, who was the head of the League of Revolutionary Black Lawyers. And he had a huge influence on me. And I said, "Kenny, I think I'm going to quit Hollywood." And he said, "Fonda, the movement has enough organizers. We don't have movie stars. You can't quit. You have to not only not quit, you have to start taking your career seriously and start being very intentional about your work." And so that's when I became a producer. So he for quite a number of years, I was very involved with the Panthers and with a number of Black
You
organizations.
can't watch a documentary about the Black Panthers without seeing you in it. To be honest, I'm like, oh, there's Jane again. There's Jane again.
Um, it was interesting, but to tell you the honest truth,
Mm-hmm.
I have an adopted Black daughter whose parents were Black Panthers.
Mm-hmm.
It was in 2016 when Trump was elected that I realized that I didn't know near enough
Mm.
about the history of racism in this country, starting with the beginnings of slavery all the way through the whole journey. And so I've spent about 3 years, really like I was in school, reading everything I could get my hands on, including stuff about white privilege. And I think it's really important for white people to do that, because you realize all the different aspects of racism and how it's affected people of color. And I mean, I feel like I'm very much a work in progress, but I'm so grateful that I made that determination. I didn't go to my Black friends to say, what should I do? I just started studying.
Mm.
And most helpful to me was the studying I've done about the meaning of white privilege. And I understand why a lot of very, very poor white people who are having a very hard time of it say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? I don't have privilege. They don't understand how skin color has played a role. And so what I've realized is, you said this just now, Baron, there's the internal individual work, and then there's the external work. It's the difference between saying I'm not racist and I'm an anti-racist. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you want to be an anti-racist, it involves doing
Mm-hmm.
something, action. And one of the values for me of having studied and continuing to study the history of racism and all the different manifestations that racism has played in this country, is how important it is that we start, and I hope it happens soon, we start dealing with all of the policies that hold Black people back. Why it is that it's almost impossible for Black people to develop wealth,
Mm-hmm.
cross-generational wealth, which, like home ownership,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
where you live, all those kinds of things. There's so many policies that are part and parcel of this, what we call a democracy, that have to be gotten rid of. And I think, I think that once those things are done away with, and Black people and all people of color begin slowly to be able to play on a somewhat leveling playing field, white people who are scared of that are not going to be scared anymore.
Mm.
I think, because when things begin to even out, it'll just become, oh, it's okay. It's
Mm-hmm.
really okay, and but I feel like my job is to talk to white people, and a lot of white people have been coming to me, and I think that's good. And and having compassion for those white folks who just don't understand yet.
Mm-hmm.
But they, you know, you've got to be taught to hate and fear, right? It starts from the beginning, and it's scary for people who are afraid of things they don't know and that they're not familiar with. And I think that's up to us white people to do something about. And I am so frigging excited about what is happening in the streets right now. Open mic, you're so right. It's an unprecedented amount of diversity. Um, there are communities here in California with no Black people living in it. And yet you see multi-generational white folks marching with Black Lives Matter signs. That's different.
You had said that the election of Trump kind of lets you know that even for as long as you've been doing this work, that you needed to do it at that point in a different way. What was it about his election that kind of activated you to to start digging in and studying the way you did?
For one thing, I realized what an incredible racist backlash there was to Obama's presidency.
Yeah, yeah.
I had not been aware of that. How much a whole lot of white people couldn't stand the fact that there was an African American president. So that took me aback. And then just the folks started coming out of the woodwork.
Mm-hmm.
And the stuff that he talked about and the way that the whole tenor of his rallies made me realize that white supremacy was way more robust than I realized it was. And that's what made me start to study. And I've just enjoyed it. It's so, I mean, like the warmth of other suns, for example, the history of the Great Migration when
Great book.
Black began to move was so interesting. And especially Black biographies, when you can really kind of see everyday life through the eyes of a Black person and what it feels like and how parents talk to their children about how to keep your head down and not get shot and blah, blah, blah. You can't know that unless you read about it, I think.
Mm. I want to switch gears, even though I'm not really switching gears, because, one of the things I respect about you is that you have a rap sheet, and your rap sheet reads as a list of things that you care a lot about, because you've spent a lot of time in the last year, actually, getting arrested over and over and over again for Fire Drill Fridays. And as well, you've been arrested in other situations in which you were standing up for different causes. But, I want to talk about what's going on with climate change, the environment, whatever the most appropriate way to talk about it is called these days, because I do feel that not only is it an important issue for literally everyone, but that people of color around the globe are going to be the first people affected by what is happening. And so, there's a lot of people who they have a hard time seeing the threat of this as immediate as it actually is. And also seeing it that it is still just like the fight for, humanitarian rights. All of it is still about us as a planet and us as creatures that need to continue to live. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, about your environmental work. And I did want to talk to you about, I already mentioned, the environmental work will affect communities of color disproportionately. So I wanted you to be able to expand on those ideas if possible.
Well, I think it's true to say that the climate crisis that is before us, this existential moment in human history, when we have barely a decade to make fundamental changes to our society, or things are going to start unraveling that are beyond our control. It is the greatest injustice. It's a humanitarian injustice because it hits the people who had the least to do with causing it,
Mm-hmm.
and who least defend themselves, from Africa and India and East Asia and South America and Central America and Black and brown communities in this country here's something that I didn't know until we started the Fire Drill Friday rallies in DC, and I began to study. In '87, a report came out that showed for the first time that it's very deliberate when fossil fuel companies put their oil wells and their fracking pits and their refineries and incinerators in communities of color and low-end communities on indigenous lands. It is deliberate because they know that those people don't have the power to fight back when they begin to die from cancer and heart disease and lung disease. And they feel that the people who do have the power won't care about them. And so they do it, they feel, with impunity.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, a large proportion of the people that joined me in DC on Fire Drill Fridays were people of color who live in those communities. And the stories are horrendous about what those people are experiencing right now. So, I mean, other people see climate crisis as something way off in the future. For a whole lot of people, and mostly people of color, it is happening right
It's
now
here.
in
Yeah.
their communities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why more people of color are dying from COVID-19, because they
Yes.
already start off at a terrible disadvantage. But you know what just breaks my heart? It's not just because of that they're dying. I have a friend, she's an environmental activist. She's a Black woman in Lowndes County, Alabama. And she told me that in Montgomery, the hospitals are filled up. There are no more ventilators. There are no more masks. The health professionals are just, they're overworked and they're crying for help. All the patients are Black. And there was a vote in the city council about whether to it's spiking in Montgomery. And all of the Black members of the city council voted, yes, let's wear masks. All the white people voted no.
Wow.
So sacrifice zones are, not just in the Cancer Valley in Louisiana, and it's also, COVID is showing us sacrifice zones.
Mm.
Nothing's being done about what's happening with COVID in prisons, because they're largely people of color. The attitude with this administration is let them die. So
Yes.
right before our eyes right now, we are seeing an assault on people of color that's deliberately not being addressed.
So much of what we end up talking to people about is the work that they're doing, and whether it's people protesting for Black Lives Matter, whether it's authors we have on, so much of an important and usually unspoken part of their work is about reimagining the world. And you have a project called Create for Earth. And one of the thrusts of it is encouraging people to reimagine how we engage with the planet. Can you tell us more about the mission for Create for Earth?
Well, I'm friends with the feminist artistry in Chicago, and a guy who in London, who's a big deal in the art world. And we decided, during the Great Depression in the 30s, Roosevelt gave tens of millions of dollars to support artists, and art just flourished.
WPA.
It did two things. It showed the face of the suffering in the Depression, but it also showed a vision of what could be. And so Judy and I decided that we needed to encourage people to create art that would do the same thing. Now, they're not getting government support right now, but maybe one day. But so that's, art that can be put on walls and billboards and placards and things like that. And young and old people are submitting their artwork, because artists have always been, this is a moment for artists, because we're at a moment of an existential crossroads, a moment of transition. And artists, more than anyone, and I'm talking about novelists, poets, actors, painters, sculptors, the full gamut of artists are the best ones to show us what's possible, to open our minds to things that we may not be aware of, and so that's why we did Create Art for the Earth.
That's fantastic. Create Art for Earth is the name of the organization. Yeah, because, and I did want to ask you, and I guess it's my last question, and kind of ties everything together that we're talking about, because I keep hearing every single day, anytime I listen to the news, even if it's financial news, people are evoking World War II, left and right. People are saying this pandemic, this is the first time this has happened since World War II. Such and such shut down since World War II. They changed the date for the first time since World War II, because this is a global crisis that is happening, the pandemic. It's immediate. Climate crisis is also a global crisis, but people go like, that's in the future, even though it's here. But pandemic is like thrust into our face. And so with World War II, with the period after the Great Depression, there were long periods of artists doing very interesting things, like post Great Depression, post World War II. A lot of my favorite art, writing, plays, all that stuff come from those eras because the world was fundamentally different and our priorities had shifted, whether we liked it or not. And people were trying to process that. So it's really beautiful that you are intentionally, going forward with that idea. And I guess that's what I'm thinking about. Like, what are some of the things, so because even like the phrase Green New Deal, that evokes FDR, right? And you just talked about FDR, the New Deal a little bit with what was happening after World War II. So I guess I wanted to ask you about like, what are some of the things, under the banner of something like a quote unquote Green New Deal, what are some of the things that you would be interested to see happen or develop that you think would be helpful for us as a country? Like kind of fantasy programs, if you could just have your druthers.
Fantasy programs.
You want me to give you an example?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's one. Talk about technology, right? A lot. I think about technology a lot where we're going. I think that we as a country, we spend a lot of money on weapons, on military. And when it comes to AI and robotics, we spend a lot of time spending money on things to kill people faster from a farther distance. But that's because that's an extension of the priorities of the people making those decisions. So in my fantasy situation, people of color are involved in deciding what kinds of technologies we develop, and developing technologies that would help replenish the earth as opposed to just continuously take from it, like fracking. That's a thing for me that I'm like, can we develop something like that, where we have an intentionality to the kind of tech that we make that helps us as a country step off how we use energy and stuff like that. So that's like I'm only talking concepts, and that's kind of what I mean. I don't mean it's like, it's got to be exactly this. I'm asking you to be fanciful.
Yeah. I'm not a fanciful kind of gal.
I would disagree. I've worked with you a
Why
little
I'm
bit
not
now.
very funny. I'm so acutely aware of the very specific things that have to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Very relatively short period of time, 9.5 years. I'm talking about what the scientists tell us. Anything the pandemic should have taught us is the importance of paying attention to the experts, scientists and medical experts. What has to happen is we have to cut our fossil fuel emissions in half. And there's no technology that is going to be ready and scaled up in time to enable that to happen. It has to be who we elect to office and our ability to go into the streets in numbers 5 times bigger than what we're seeing right now, and forcing governments on the federal and state and local levels to stop all fossil fuel development. That's what has to happen. That's the number one. If we don't do that, it's kind of going to be out of our hands, and we're going to see an unraveling of the ecosystem that we depend on to survive.
Yeah, if anybody thinks it's chaos in the streets right now,
Well, one of the things that excites me so much about Fire Drill Friday is that a large numbers of the people. I mean, last Friday we had over 100,000 people tuned in to our show. We've had as high as 250,000 people.
That's amazing.
And so a lot of them have never been involved with protests before. And so this is what we were hoping would happen, because we need new people, not just every people who are used to. And this is why I'm so excited, Open Mike, with the fact that a lot of the people that are joining these marches right now are new to protest. And we have to encourage that more and more and more.
If I could ask you one more.
Telling us this. Yeah, I'm sorry.
If I could ask you one more quick question. I was reading a piece about your history of activism, and there was a part in it where you were reflecting on protesting Nixon and protesting Vietnam. And you had this quote where you were saying, "It was a very tumultuous and polarized time. There was a lot of anger and blame. For myself, I didn't always know how to channel my anger in constructive ways." And speaking to what you were just saying, there's a lot of angry people right now. And what would you say are some constructive ways that they can channel their anger right now?
Well, let me just say the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter and all the other organizations that are part of the movement for Black Lives are really showing us the value of nonviolent protest. And I think following the leadership of the movement for Black Lives is the way to go. A lot of them are Black queer women. And I personally think that that fact in and of itself is part of what makes this time that we're living through different. You know, the Panthers, it was very much a Black men leading. Well, it was a whole different approach to protest. So I think that the best thing, the way that people can channel their rage is to follow the lead of the movement for Black Lives.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's a wonderful leadership. And I just, you know, I several years ago, I got flyers in the mail, how to keep yourself well and healthy from Black Lives Matter. I thought, I've never gotten anything like this from any organization. And that was before I realized that it was headed by women. You know, that kind of, we have to look out for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We have to take time for ourselves and our families. More than ever, we have to stay healthy because we're so important, right?
Yeah, we had the honor.
I think that's the way to go, yeah.
We had the honor of having one of the founders, Patrice Collars, on, and she said collective care is the way that she put it. And that flyer that you got is a perfect example of that. Everybody, that was Jane Fonda. Thank you so much for being here, Jane.
And I encourage people to read Patricia Collars' book, They Call Me a Terrorist, because it really gives a bird's eye, very personal and extremely moving view of what it means to be a Black woman in this country right now. And because her brother has mental health issues and what has been done to him in prisons. And I've been working with her on Reform LA jails. And so I encourage that They Call Me a Terrorist. That and Ta-Nehisi Coates' biography are two recommended readings.
Yes, indeed.
Also, another one called White Fragility for folks watching this who are white.
Right. Robin DiAngelo. Jane Fonda, everybody. Heck.
That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you very much. Jane Fonda, check out check out Fire Drill Fridays. Obviously, check out Create Art for Earth. Check out Grace and Frankie on Netflix. Check out the documentary about Jane. Check out, one of the worst things about working with Jane Fonda is that literally everybody wants to know what Jane Fonda's like. That's like the number one question. It's like, what's Jane like? And one of the things that I always say is, someone once told me there's a difference between demanding respect and commanding respect. And I said, Jane commands respect.
That's amazing.
That's one of the things that I appreciate about her is her inability to suffer fools. It's a great quality, and then she gets playful. She said that she wasn't fanciful. I've seen it happen on set every now and then. She likes to cut up and have a laugh as well. So sorry everybody to burst the bubble.